the Redis challenge. Redis is very widely used now. A lot of people are familiar with it, have used it, but what a lot of people don't know is that started off as a weekend project.
Oh.
And it was about 300 lines of Lua for the first version. So you can replicate fairly quickly the initial version of that, the thing that got it started, got the interest and proved Redis as a useful product. You can replicate all of that functionality in the challenge, and you have what was enough to get Redis off the ground. So you can see how an open source project started, and you can build that, and you could then take it further and scale it.
Welcome everyone to another exciting episode. In this episode, we will talk about the coding challenges. And to talk about that, we have invited the author of Coding Challenges, John Crickett. So a warm welcome to John, and tell us about yourself.
Hi, Huzaifa. Thanks for having me on, and thank you for having me in front of your listeners. So I'm a software engineer. I've worked both as an individual contributor and a manager on all sorts of bits of software, and I started learning the coding challenges to share things that I've done to learn other programming languages. So I started learning Rust at the end of last year. I was using some of these challenges as exercises, and that's why I started sharing them.
Great. And I have seen your newsletter it is like very exciting. Like you shared like different sort of small projects that when I have explored them, and just by reading the blog, you learned a lot about them and the architecture, how to structure a particular problem. So yeah, that's good. It's not just an alert for everyone who is watching. It's not like coding challenges that we talk about in interviews. These coding challenges are to learn more about coding, to learn more about this particular software engineering field.
Yeah, absolutely. They're mini projects. So I like to learn programming languages by actually building a clone of real world software. I started off years ago actually wanting to build my own software, build a business, but then found that learning a programming language alongside learning what the product was and trying to invent the product was just too much new stuff. So I found it easier to pick an existing project or pick something I wanted to learn about, like Huffman compression is one I've done in a lot of different languages, something I learned about at uni, and it seemed like a fun project to do. So I've done that several times in different programming languages, and you end up with a working application at the end of it.
Yeah, that is true. And tell us about your background in the tech industry, just so that we know where are you coming from, and like what are the different roles that you have been working on.
Sure. So I started in the industry 27 or so years ago with one of the UK's first internet service providers when the internet was new and we all had very slow dial-up modems. That was very fun, very exciting. So I learned about CGI. I remember Internet Explorer version 1. I moved from there to a very traditional engineering company and built very traditional engineering and SCADA systems for a few years, including the control software for Singapore Metro a while back, so railway signaling systems. Then we had the dot-com boom, which is very exciting. Everyone was starting a business, so I thought, yeah, I'm going to do that too. Epic failure of imagination in that I started a very typical engineering body shop company, just like what I worked for, rather than a .com. For a weird pivot, ended up building a .com in the end and building a bed and breakfast search engine, a little bit like Airbnb, but back in 2002. Again, failure of imagination, didn't have the vision to make it as big as Airbnb. But it grew, and we built a little travel site, and we did fairly well there. After a few years, got married, started a family, moved away from the entrepreneurial side and back to regular employment, did some work in finance. And then since then, I've ended up in network optimization and planning with artificial intelligence, a little bit back to finance, a little bit back of some data engineering and high performance compute. And recently some data engineering, now back to telco. Oh. So a real mixture of different things in all sorts of different languages, different technologies, from very low level embedded stuff all the way up to websites and JavaScript on the cloud.
Yeah, wow. Like this is some experience, like you have been working in different domains and different, I would say even industries, and then starting your own company, own product, and then doing jobs at different companies. So yeah, that is quite some experience. And with that, like, I would like to ask, why you started, creating these coding challenges and writing these blogs. And because I wanted to know the importance of these coding challenges, as a listener, someone, why they should, practice them.
Sure. So over the years, as I say, I've learned lots of different programming languages. I first did the Huffman compression one to learn C back in 1998. I've redone a few different ones as I learned Python in the mid 2000s. And I've always found them quite useful to go back to these exercises as I've learned different languages, or I've found them useful to pick something similar to, when I got into finance, a very low latency, high performance service, pick something like emulating a Memcache server to learn about concurrency, to learn about threading, to learn about low latency. So they've been good things for me to do over the years. And I've also, over that time, been a manager and mentored a lot of developers. So that experience has helped me pick out little projects from what we were doing to give to junior developers or to give to developers who are new to the team, carve them out of projects, break it down, and help them learn either our technology or our business, or help them learn the skills they needed to work on the main company. So all that added up. So when I was learning Rust end of last year, beginning of this year, started looking at some of these again. I had a discussion with somebody, and it made me think I should light some of these up. So I thought, well, why not? I'll start a quick newsletter on LinkedIn. If I'm lucky, maybe 1,000 people will be interested and will follow by December this year. It actually reached nearly 2,000 in the first weekend. So it's just kind of taken off since then and been fun, and lots of people enjoying them. I've had hundreds of people feedback with different solutions they've done. Got a GitHub repo now going, lots of shared solutions, and that's really gathering steam. So a lot of people find it very, very useful to learn different languages, learn different techniques, or just practice their software engineering.
Yeah, and I have seen, like, on your post, like, there's like very good engagement. I have seen so many people, they are engaging with your post, and they're really connected with, what you are doing. So this is like the most important aspect. And plus, on top of that, you have like one problem, and then every person has like a different perspective of how to solve it. So this is the most interesting part. If you talk with me, like, because everyone has a different perspective. I think, oh, this approach is the best approach, right? But like, obviously in a community, we all are sharing, okay, I did this in that way, maybe like that, and I read that solution, I say, oh, damn it, like, I haven't thought about that, it's actually better. So it sort of creates that, learning, and sort of this very good community as well, I would say.
Yeah, it's a great way. And we've had some more junior developers publishing their solutions, sharing them, and we've got a very good community on Discord. So some of the more experienced people there have been reviewing their code and giving them feedback, saying, well, that's great, you've got a reasonable solution, but have you thought about this? So a lot of the junior developers on things like the WC challenge will have a solution that works for a small file, but they haven't necessarily thought about what happens if it was a larger file. Again, some of the other solutions, people have built something that works quite simply and is giving them enough to get going. But the more senior developers are feeding back, well, what about this edge case? So it's really been quite good. And I hope that a lot of the senior developers are also getting something out of that, and that they're mentoring people, they're building their skills there.
That is
And I'm enjoying it. I've been exposed to some different programming languages. I've never done Clojure, and I've had a couple of people look at building solutions in that. So I'm now looking at code in that and learning a bit about that while trying to give them some feedback.
That is very good. And as a beginner, when you start this particular software journey, and then you're learning new stuff, so what are the coding challenges that you would recommend, like in the start of your career, that you should do, or you should check them out?
So if you go to coding challenges, that FYI, I've started tagging them with beginner. But the ones that I really think are really, really useful for beginners are replicating some of the Unix command line tools. So things like WC, get a bit more advanced, things like grep, things like cat, things like head, and some of the other stuff we've got on there. Because this introduces not just to building some of the tools, but also how powerful the Unix command line tools are. There's a whole course on Coursera on data engineering with just the Unix command line tools. In the Unix command line tools ones, I also refer back to the book The Art of Programming, which is an excellent book that introduces a lot of good practices on how to compose software, how to break it down, and explains the Unix philosophy. So this is all really useful skills that you get exposure to the command line tools, you get exposed to the bash, Unix philosophy, good things on breaking down a project, thinking about how you structure your software, and you build a bunch of useful applications at the end of it.
That is true. And let's talk about all these coding challenges. Obviously they help you understand the problem statement, and then obviously what is the optimal solution for it. So if a person have this particular problem statement, so what are the steps, like how a person approach to it, like and then they have to in the end create the optimal solution for that. So what are the in between steps?
So for each of the coding challenges, I've tried to break it down into steps to take you through a logical process so that you start with a simple step. Quite often in that, I break down, the first part of it is you need to import some of the data, or you need to read some data, analyze it. And I help people think about but they break that down and introduce people to things like test-driven development as a good way of, instead of having to have the whole program, you can just have a module that deals with something. So I kind of guide people in each of the challenges to that, and I hope that leads them to starting to understand as they go through the challenges how they could actually approach a project like this themselves. I also recently did a course, a cohort-based course, where I went in depth in my process of how I break a project down. I'm going to turn some of that material into an ebook and make that available soon for people to go through as another way of learning.
Great, great, great. That is amazing. And when we talk about obviously these algorithms and these small projects, so the one very main thing is the space complexity and the time complexity, because obviously you can create a solution and it gives the expected output. For instance, you're doing something for your own getting better at something, but the main aspect is like how your code is performing in terms of these two factors. So tell us about that bit more.
So it's great to have an understanding of that as a software engineer. We can have a bit of an obsession with it sometimes because it doesn't always matter depending on what you're doing. But again, as we're seeing for some of the seniors that are feeding back to the juniors that have done this, occasionally they're not thinking about it. So it's fairly useful to think through the command line tools. So if you take something like the command line tools that are streaming data off disk, to think about the storage and the complexity of that and what it's going to use. So if you're reading a 10 kilobyte file, that's very different to reading a 100 gigabyte file. So the space complexity is well worth thinking about. Are you processing the data by loading all in, or are you streaming it and processing a bit at a time? Again, worth thinking about the time complexity there. So if you're looking at something like some of the sorting algorithms, the time complexity matches quite a lot. When you build a sort command, there are different algorithms you can implement there. It's a good chance to learn about those and to be aware of them, and also to understand, sort is a great one. If you look at implementing it, how you do that, whether you read it on memory or you stream it from disk, how you're going to approach that. And for some, I don't think I've got a really good challenge for this, but for some of the ones coming soon, I'm going to think a little bit more about understanding how the computer works under the hood. So understanding things like caching, understanding things like false sharing and how that impacts on performance, because you can take two algorithms that are order n and they can have vastly different performance. You can take some algorithms that are order n squared performance and they can still perform better than an order n algorithm if you've got conflicting issues with the cache. So important things to think about, but all these things interact.
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely agree. And when you're working on a small system, small application, then even if your code is not very much optimized, it will work. But if you're working on a big application, your company software has like millions and billions of traffic, then if your code is unoptimized, you might, it's not like it will get slow. You might start facing errors. So that's why like a lot of people I've seen, they have like 4 or 5 years of experience, and then they are learning about the dynamic programming and the bottom up approach and these sort of stuff, because obviously at that time you have like big chunk of data, so you don't have to do the computation again and again and stuff like that. So that is very important, that from the beginning you also learn these concepts, and because it will help you eventually to make better algorithms and build better applications, I would say.
Yeah, and the other side to think about that is to think about the scale for every time you address it. I've seen a couple of systems now where when somebody designed them, they built the UI just thinking about a certain scale and not thinking about how their users would use it. Now, a few years ago, I mentioned I worked on a telco company. We built software to optimize networks. When the original software was built, they were dealing with companies that had a network with 10 or 15 links in it. When that then scaled to some of the FAN companies we started selling to that had several thousand links, now you have a drop-down box and you want somebody to find a link from several thousand in there, it becomes an unusable GUI. So you need to think about your scale, how that affects your user interface, how that affects the performance of your algorithms, how that affects how you store your data. It impacts at multiple levels, as you say.
Yeah, that is true. Uh, and one more aspect of it as well, like if you want to learn, these coding, how to optimize your code. I have personally practiced using LeetCode and HackerRank, these platforms, and I've seen, like in some of these platforms, you see, you have a problem, then you provide your solution, and then there are like multiple solutions to a particular problem. And then like I remember the last course that I did, it was Algo Expert. Yeah. So on that, like it shows, the three solutions as well. Like this is the normal solution, this is the optimized one, and this is like the best solution. So by doing that, you just do like 10, 15 or 20, algorithms. As a senior, you don't have to go into the basic ones. So but if you're a beginner, I would recommend just going through all of them. But like then you understand these concepts, and then you are working on something, and then you realize, oh, I can implement that sort of like data structure or algorithm in my scenario. So it helps you in that way as well. It is not just like it will only help you in interviews or these things, like it will help you in your day-to-day routine as well. Because I have seen that, like I have done some challenges like 2-3 years ago, but now still like I'm building something, and sometimes something pops in my mind, and I was like, oh yeah, I can use that approach. So it's very good in that sense.
Yeah, they have their place. They can be quite useful. The counter side to that is we can have too much an obsession with them. And I've then seen people go away and implementing some of the algorithms themselves in production code or implementing the data structures. And for most people, they're not going to implement stuff that's as solid, as well tested as what's in the standard library for whatever your programming language is. And it's not going to be as well optimized. So it's great to understand the fundamentals. It's great to understand how you can apply those techniques. But we have to be cautious that we don't go then reinvent the wheel and reapply those.
Yeah, that is
because
true.
a lot of day-to-day software engineering is far more about understanding what does the customer want, what do we need to build, what's the complexities of the domain that we're working in. If we're building a search engine at Google size, what's the complexity of handling all that data? If we're dealing with, say, a data engineering system, what's the complexity of how do we get the data that we want in to better process it and generate whatever outcome we want? And a lot of it's people, understanding what are the requirements, what should it do.
That is true. And because, I also think, like the main thing is you understand the problem, you understand what business needs, and then you implement something. I have seen like a lot of people, like back in the days and now as well, like a lot of companies, they used to have these scoring challenges during the interview process as well. And people, go to these platforms, and they are, I would say memorizing these, decision tree, how to do this, how to do this. But I never recommend that, because I say, you practice these scoring challenges not just to ace your interview, or like they will ask you to make these sort of algorithm. No one knows that the actual algorithm in their mind. It is just to understand the fundamentals, it is to understand the system better. As you mentioned earlier, I will create a video that help people understand how everything works more in kernel level and below CLI. You talked a lot about CLI, so people are not concerned about that, right? So this is something that uh, your value you get from these coding challenges, not just memorizing that. And now I've seen like there's a shift in the hiring process as well. Previously, like I remember like 2-3 years ago, it was too much focused on these coding challenges. But now they have, they ask about different scenarios and then say how you will design your system. Then in that, like there's the first aspect is how you understand the problem. Do you have the knowledge about the architecture and designing a system? Then it comes to your, you explain them, this is how I will design it. So this is like all packaged, like it's not like just memorizing them.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly here in the UK, I've seen a lot more focus recently on interviews focusing on soft skills, focusing on whether or not you can deal with requirements, focusing on whether or not you can look at the system design, focusing on really trying to understand what's being asked for and think about requirements and edge cases and test cases.
Yeah, that is, and I think it's more important as well, like just asking a person and then you get to know a lot about them as well, that they have this design sense and then how they're approaching it. Are they communicating well? So that is also something that for all developers, you guys should, work on.
Yeah, it's team sport.
Yeah. And what are some of the common mistakes that developer make when they are, doing these coding challenges and creating these small applications?
I think the most common thing is focusing just on one aspect of it without looking at the bigger picture. And I wonder if sometimes people are focusing a bit more on just getting it done for the sake of completing it, rather than the project is focused on learning. You should, pick the challenges that interest you, pick the challenges that help you learn the bit. So if you're interested in front end development, maybe look at something like the URL shortener or the LinkedIn carousel generator. If you're really particularly interested in um, system software, things like Redis and Memcached are great ones to look at and build and get an understanding of, and maybe learn something like network programming or concurrency. So, it's not about completing all of them. It's about finding what helps you learn what you want, what's taking you in the direction that you want for your career, or just what's fun. Because, curiosity is a great thing to have as a software engineer. So if you're curious and it's fun learning, then that's great too.
Yeah, that is true. And I also think like, just by practicing these small coding challenges, that you also get this, sense, and you get this, learn this art of, completing something in a small span of time. For instance, now, for instance, you're working in a company and you have like a problem, hot fix, and then you have to fix it. And everybody's saying, just fix it in like, 10-15 minutes. Like a lot of customers are reporting it, and then you have to debug it, you have to see, and then you have to quickly just test it and just implement that particular solution and deploy it. So similarly, when you are just practicing a particular coding challenge with the time limit, it's also very good. Then you learn that sense, okay, I don't have to confuse. Usually I've seen a lot of people, they get confused and then they eventually ran out of time. So yeah, just I would like your take on that, like how to practice those time sensitive coding challenges, and what's your take on that, like if they are like helpful for developers or not?
I don't particularly think that focusing on having a time limit is that helpful. Um, it's it's not that important in the real world generally to fix things immediately, because if you rush things, you tend to end up skipping the important bit, rushing the solution out. And I've seen more hurried fixes pushed to production, resulting in a cascading failure and making the situation worse, rather than just pausing for a little bit and figuring out what the sensible approach is. Again, often it's more sensible to just roll back something in production, or to have done it with a canary release or some other thing that allows you to detect something that's early, and then you can deal with it in a controlled manner. I think what's good about my coding challenges and the time boxing is it makes people think a bit more about how do we build not just the bits we want. So if you work through the average book or the average tutorial, you're just reproducing the code from the tutorial or the book. You're not necessarily thinking about it. You're not necessarily having to ask yourself, how would I do this? You're not necessarily having to think about how do I build this? How do I test it? You won't be necessarily pushed outside your comfort zone. And with a straightforward tutorial, there's always, you can look at the code in the book or look at the code in the tutorial and skip over the bit when it gets hard. So rather than the time focus, I like to push people more a bit to, I'm not giving you the answer on the plate. I'm telling you the steps. I'm telling you what you need to do. I'm telling you where you find the specification, where you find the relevant RFC, telling you how the project's broken down, but you still have to do that thinking for yourself.
Yeah. I also think like I've seen that, and it is like very new. Like I haven't seen like a lot of companies doing that, because most of the people, like even if you go to these platforms, they have, okay, this is and then they have the answer as well. So your point is right. Even in the tutorials, like you see there's like a problem, and then obviously if you go in the end of the video, you can see what's the solution, and even they have GitHub repository of that. So but in you have like a different approach. And then if a person actually follows that, then they obviously get the feel of the real life project as well, because in your day-to-day real life project, you will not get like from a senior, you might get the helping material or the just the overall architecture, but you won't get the actual code, or okay, you have to compare your code with this one. So it's good in
Yeah.
that that it is like very close to the real world example, I would say.
Yeah, that's what I'm aiming for. So, small enough that you can build them in a weekend or a couple of weekends, but big enough that you're building real world software. You're not just doing another Mandelbrot set from a textbook. You're not writing another Hello World in React. You're doing something that's a bit more substantial.
Yeah, that is true. And other than, the technical correctness of a particular problem, like what are the other factors, like I would say readability of the code, efficiency, documentation. So what's your, take on that? How a person can, learn these skill and improve them?
So those are all really valuable skills. One of the things I did with the course I learned a couple of months ago, the cohort-based course, is I included in that code reviewing. I included in that writing an ADR. I included in that talking through and sharing your ideas with other people. And the focus there was I was trying to get people, because you could solve the problems in any language, trying to get people in to come along, code review other people's code, and maybe see a language they hadn't seen before. So, as I mentioned, somebody did it in Clojure, somebody else did it in Rust. There was a solution in C++. That gives you a chance to look at code you've not seen before, see how readable it is when you maybe don't know the language. And it also helps and somebody else looking at this going, well, hey, I've never seen that language. But actually, because you've structured it this way, it's very readable. So I like that. And you're getting very good feedback in the group. I introduce people to ADRs because a lot of people still aren't using architectural decision records. And it's a very useful way of recording what decisions did you make along the way? What was the process? We looked at including a CI/CD pipeline in there so that you had some tests and they were run as part of your push to GitHub. And again, encourage people to share a README in the project and explain what it was and how it was built. So all of that takes it from more than just a coding exercise or tutorial to, hey, I've built a real project. I thought about how this is going to be supported. This could now evolve. There's ADRs documenting the key decisions. There's a README telling you how to do it. There's automated tests that you can jump in and start refactoring it. There's CI that checks that those tests are being run regularly. So it brings it all together to a mini project and some real world experience.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And I would like to for someone who is they want to learn a new language, and every person has their own approach. So what is your advice, if someone they are actually a programmer, they know 2-3 languages, but they need to learn a new language, or it might be it is their like first language, the programming language they want to learn. So what is your advice on what are the steps to learn a particular language?
So my approach has always been I'm a bookworm. I like reading books. My approach has always been to get a couple of books on the language, read the books to give me that overview, to give me that kind of lay of the land and the context of the language. And how did it come about? Why is it there? what are the general basics of it. And then maybe I'll build a couple of small Hello World type projects to just understand how to use the compiler or the interpreter, understand the build environment, get a suitable IDE or editor set up. But after that, I'm straight into building projects. And as I say, that's how coding challenges came about. I like to build real world software. And I've done various exercises over the years, and coding challenges is now me putting some of those down, adding some new ones. So some of the things that I've done recently, including the coding challenges, are new. This week, I'm hoping to do one on QR codes. So those are new, but they're also quite fun now because I didn't know how complex QR codes are. I'm learning a lot about that as I like the challenge. So it's fun for me. I'm learning something, and it's a great exercise then for somebody to learn a language, because rather than just learning the bit for that exercise in the book or the tutorial, you learn to build a full project. And that's when it pushes you from your comfort zone to, hey, I've got to do something a bit more than hello world.
And that is true. And yeah, I also believe, in the coding challenges, that all your coding challenges, they are, practical applications. So that is very good. You're not just focusing on, decision trees and, binary tree, or how to do this, how to do this. Like, I've seen a lot of people, they're just focusing on that. I wouldn't say like that is a bad approach, but like, working on these real life application gives you, more exposure. So that is like a very good thing, because personally, me as well, I would like to do these challenges that, for instance, you talk about QR code. That's very exciting, right? So, or like building your own 2FA system. So how does that work internally? Because all the applications nowadays have this 2FA enabled. Previously some applications, but now everybody. So a person would be intrigued by, oh, how to build that. Okay, let's, that is a good use case. So just doing these things, I think it's good as well, like for even, and it excites the developer as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the great example of that was the Redis challenge. Redis is very widely used now. A lot of people are familiar with it. They've used it, but what a lot of people don't know is that started off as a weekend project.
Oh,
And it was built. It was about 300 lines of Lua for the first version. So you can replicate fairly quickly the initial version of that, the thing that got it started and got the interest and proved Redis as a useful product. You can replicate all of that functionality in the challenge, and you have what was enough to get Redis off the ground. So you can see how an open source project started, and you can build that, and you could then take it further and scale it. The URL shortener challenge has most of the functionality of several URL shortening businesses. All you need to do beyond that is add some kind of logon on authentication, maybe a billing system, and you can turn it into a full-blown business. So it's real-world applications, and you can take them further if you wish.
yeah, that is true. That is true. And in the end, I would like to ask, like, what's your advice on people, who are interested in these coding challenges, and what they should do and how they can, get better in that?
So my advice, jump in, go to the website, codingchallenges.fyi or codingchallenges.substack.com, and sign up for the email list. Pick a challenge that interests you, jump in, start doing it. If you get stuck, there's a Discord group linked from the website. I've just added a Facebook page as well. So, come join the community somewhere, ask for help, discuss it, share your ideas, ask questions. Very friendly bunch of people. So, get stuck in, start doing something, build some real software, and have fun.
That is good. That is good. And yeah, that brings us to end of another exciting episode. And thank you, John, for joining us and sharing these amazing insights regarding the coding challenges.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for all the listeners, just go to John website, codingchallenges.fyi, and it's an amazing website, and all the newsletter, everything. I will definitely recommend this, and start working on these challenges and get better in coding. So until next time, have a nice day. Bye bye.